livre. Esse aqui está livre. Nessa.
Ai.
Anya, on your orders. Do I have it? Não, cadê? Cadê o Sérgio?
Sérgio Amaral tá pegando café. Eu nunca tinha visto essa caixa de café. Esperto esse negócio.
On your orders.
E na volta, faço a mala e vou me embora.
Eu li uma coisa, cara.
Eu não tô vendo.
Não, nós vamos chegar um pouco atrasados.
Tá.
Não sei se tem alguém da FP aí.
Aqui.
Um, dois, deixa o Sérgio sentar aqui, a gente vai. Olha, você graduou no Rio Branco o ano que eu cheguei aqui.
Foi? 80?
80.
2 de...
Significa que você é muito jovem.
É, exatamente.
E
2 de setembro de 80. Você já tinha me dito isso. Que dia que você chegou aqui mesmo?
eu entrei aqui em setembro de 80.
Eu nunca entrei. Que dia?
Setembro de quando?
De
Setembro
80.
de 80 eu cheguei no... Não, eu cheguei em maio de 80 nos Estados Unidos.
É, eu cheguei em setembro de 80.
Abril de 80, no dia 26 de abril, um dia depois do aniversário da Revolução dos Cravos.
Então vamos.
Podemos? Is the webcast on? Probably, yes. The webcast is on, probably, right? Okay. Well, good afternoon. My name is Paulo Sotero. I'm the director of the Brazil Institute here at the Wilson Center. It's a great pleasure, it's a great honor to greet Ambassador Marcos Galvão, a dear friend from many years. I just noticed in the bio that he graduated from Itamaraty in the year of 1980, which is the year I arrived in Washington. From Rio Branco in 1980, so it's, I hadn't noticed that before, but really it means that he's very young. And well, Marcos is a dear friend, as I said. He currently occupies the #2 position at the Brazilian Ministry of Foreign Relations. He was previously Brazil's ambassador to Japan, where he had to deal with a few days or a few weeks after the arrival, the consequences for the extensive Brazilian community in Japan with a tsunami, which is very well timed arrival. Later, he served as Brazilian ambassador at the organization, the World Trade Organização Mundial de Comércio, the WTO. As I mentioned, Marcos is a career diplomat, admired by all his colleagues at Itamaraty, and for the past year or so, he has served the country as Deputy Foreign Minister. In that position, he made some important noise in Brazil regarding one of his areas of expertise, which is trade. As you all know, Brazil has historically been a country rather close to trade, and is undergoing now a major effort to overcome the deepest economic crisis in its history, and there seems to be a consensus that in order to do that, Brazil will have to change on trade and becoming more open, and this at a time when traditional defenders of an open economy have decided to go the other way, making the challenge even more complicated. That's all I wanted and needed to tell you, I'd like to welcome also all those that are watching us on webcast live from Brazil and from many other places. I know that there are a few watching from Geneva, from Brasilia, from São Paulo. And with that, I would like to give the floor to Ambassador Marcos Galvão, who will speak for half hour or something like that, and then we are going to open for conversation. This is on the record. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paulo, who in fact is a dear young friend of many years, many years. In fact, and he had even met not that he had met my parents before even we met. Paulo had met them professionally. It's an honor to be back here. I used to come here when I served in Washington until 2005 for 4.5 years. And it's an honor to come here, and I couldn't do it in May, and now I'm doing it today. I also greet my colleagues, Ambassador Sérgio Amaral, Ambassador to the United States, and José Luis Costa, Ambassador to the OAS, and all those present that I salute through Ambassador Tony Harrington, also someone I've known for many years since he was in Brasilia as ambassador, and then Washington when I was here as Minister Counsel at our embassy. Well, let's get down to the subject, and I also, of course, thank you all, and also thank those who are watching us on webcast. I'm here. I came to Washington for another round of meetings at the State Department, mainly with Ambassador Tom Shannon, who, as you know, was also ambassador to Brazil before. We've met. I've been 1.5 years in this job, and we've met 3 times. I understand we will meet in the very near future again, this time in Brazil, for the 2nd time in Brazil. So this is to show that there is regular dialogue going on, not only through our respective embassies in Washington and Brasilia, but also directly and between officials at the State Department. Ambassador Amaral was just telling me as we drove down that there have been many ministerial visits from Brazil into Washington, and also judiciary leaders, members of the Supreme Court. So there's a lot of diplomatic activity and government contacts and judiciary and other spheres contacts between Brazil and the U.S. Going on regularly. I came with the director responsible for our bilateral agenda, Ernesto Fraga de Araújo, who also served here as DCM, and they met with their State Department counterparts before I met with Ambassador Shannon, and also after I met with Ambassador Shannon. So this is with the sense of first to prepare and then to begin follow-up work with a view to pushing ahead the agenda that we want to push forward. Well, our subject is Brazilian foreign policy. It's not a subject that has been the object of, I guess, much attention on the press and so on. So I think it's useful. I wouldn't call it a blank, but it's useful to, I guess, remind our partners and those who observe Brazil of what is being done as far as foreign policy is concerned. And before that, it's useful, although almost useless for most of you here, but I'll do it anyway, to remind ourselves that, well, Brazil is the 5th largest country in the world as far as territory goes, 5th or 6th as far as population goes, one of the 10 largest economies in the world. That position varies within the 10 according to exchange rate and our growth rate. That is, we just went through the deepest recession in our history, as is well known, and we're coming out of it. 2 years of recession, we're going to have growth this year and more significant growth next year. There's a consensus about that. It's at this time given. Yesterday, news came out about recovery finally also in the federal government revenue, which is the last indicator that was missing of recovery. We had all curves were already pointing up, but revenue was still not responding clearly. Now revenue also has begun to respond clearly, and this is very relevant, as we all know, on the fiscal front. So recovery is picking up. Today it's first page of the FT. There's a note speaking about growing confidence in Brazil. Consumer confidence, investor confidence, business confidence are all turning upward. This is not in question, it's there, the numbers are there. Reforms are being put forward. Last year, the establishment of a ceiling for government expenditures. More recently, the approval of the labor reform, and currently under negotiation with Congress, Social Security reform, which is crucial for the improvement of the fiscal situation in Brazil. And as Paulo mentioned, there is, regarding the external front, where the numbers have been good for some time now, but that was the chapter where the numbers were never negative. They remained positive. FDI remained strong despite the recession. Our trade performance remains quite reasonable and now very strong as well as far as export recovery goes. But as Paulo mentioned, regarding on the external front, there is a consensus in Brazil covering all ranges of opinion and ideology, all the full spectrum. There is a consensus that the recovery of sustained growth and the way ahead in Brazil involves a stronger and more competitive presence in the world economy, a deeper integration. And there's nobody questioning that in Brazil. All relevant social, political, and economic forces are saying and very much the same thing. And there's no opposition in the sense to moving in that direction. And this is, as those of you who have known Brazil for a longer time know, this has not always been the case. So it's relevant that we now have this consensus. Well, but I guess many other Brazilians who came to Washington spoke at the Wilson Center about our economic recovery. You've been hearing a lot about that. So at this point in time, I'll move into the subject, which is Brazilian foreign policy. Of course, recovery is very much a part of that. It's the background for that as well. And also foreign policy is geared to, and one of the objectives of our foreign policy always was to strengthen our path towards development. It continues to be so. So there's a cycle there, and there's a role that foreign policy plays in reinforcing this trend towards recovery and then the maintenance of sustained development. Quickly, in terms of foreign policy, you all know that diplomacy and foreign policy played a major role in the construction of Brazil, to begin with, in the definition of our borders, which was done through diplomacy, negotiation. The last conflict we had with any of our neighbors ended in 1870, that is 147 years ago. We have, just to mention a fact which is almost anecdotal, we have the third oldest diplomatic academy in the world, after those of the Vatican, of Austria and the Vatican, in that order. So we have a diplomatic tradition to speak of. All recruitment into our foreign service has been done through the Diplomatic Academy since 1946. We have in Itamaraty, which is the nickname of our foreign service, a strong institution that of course, is not perfect. No institutions are perfect, but is an institution that is widely respected in Brazil, and I would dare say, perhaps also by some of our partners and those we deal with. We have one of the largest diplomatic apparatuses as far as the way it's stretched out goes in the world. We have, to give only an indication, we have more than 220 diplomatic missions and consular posts, 37 embassies in Africa, none of which we intend to close, by the way, which was some communication noise that occurred at the change of government in May last year. We have a tradition of non-partisan diplomacy and foreign policy that we also are proud of and that we make a point of reinforcing. Of course, it is said that foreign policy is a state policy, but it is also a government policy. So at the same time that there is a permanent element to foreign policy and to diplomacy, as everywhere, governments, as they come and go, of course, naturally make adjustments in priorities, in tone, and that is only natural around the world. But we have a foreign policy that we wish that is, and we wish will continue to be, and even more so, based on the values of Brazilian society, such as democracy, human rights, freedom, and also of course, on our national interests. Our priority, as I said, has always been and will continue to be, for legitimate reasons, the development of our country, the improvement of the living conditions of Brazilians, millions of which still live in poverty, despite all the progress made over the last 2 decades. There are many Brazilians we have to bring out of poverty, and foreign policy has a role in that, but also in responding to other social concerns, such as public safety in Brazil. And this is an issue that has become more important in our international activity, mostly in cooperation with our neighbors regarding combating crime, organized crime, drug traffic, etc., because that has a direct impact on the life of our citizens and on the crime rates we unfortunately have in our cities, mostly in our cities. As those of you who are familiar with Brazilian diplomacy and Brazilian foreign policy know, we are not prone to major U-turns as far as foreign policy goes. We basically have despite variations and adjustments that are made by governments that are totally legitimate and natural, we work with long-term objectives and with long-term perspectives, and because our country's reality doesn't change with governments that come and go. Our country's needs don't change overnight with governments that come and go, nor does the reality of the countries we deal with change overnight with governments that come and go. So it is only natural that we have an element of permanence, and as most countries do in their diplomatic activity. For instance, as an example, the profile of our economy doesn't change every few years. So there's no reason why our foreign policies should let's say, turn upside down every 4 or 8 years. We believe there is a cost. We have always believed there is a cost in not thinking and acting strategically with a sense, longer term, let's say, direction and taking into consideration longer term elements. And we also believe that also for everybody, and including our partners, there are opportunities will be missed if one were to choose to deal with us and everyone else in terms of cycles, economic ups and downs that all countries, all economies go through. And so we always believed and continue to believe that diplomacy and international relations are fields in which permanent facts and more prospective considerations are central. Well, and before I go into a quick geographic overview of what we've been doing, just to mention that as we try and work in order to contribute to Brazil's development on the international front, we have a tradition of trying. One of the objectives we seek is to preserve, as I guess most countries do, some degree of autonomy in terms of our decision making and in terms of the paths we may choose. But it is good to make clear, and I guess this is more and more clear, that autonomy has nothing to do with autarky and closing up. It's just maintaining, giving our political system and our decision makers and our society ultimately some margin to choose and to adjust as we go along. Well, quickly now an overview, and we'll go quickly over to show what we're doing, what is being done by the Brazilian government at this point in time, by Brazilian diplomacy, in a moment when the economic crisis and domestic politics take up more space in the press than foreign policy. I think it would be useful to just remind friends of what is going on. Well, how many minutes did I already consume? Because I put the watch here and forgot to check when I started. Okay, so I'll do this in 15 minutes. Well, Mercosul. Mercosul, a lot of energy was consumed, as you know, regarding the situation in Venezuela. That consumed a lot of political energy, diplomatic energy. Venezuela, as you know, has been suspended from the Mercosul. First, because it didn't comply with the obligations it had assumed 4 years before when it joined Mercosul, and then under Mercosul's democratic clause. That said, there has been a lot of progress in Mercosul. We tried to identify very early on in the administration blockages to trade within Mercosul, among the 4 founding members of Mercosul that currently are there. And the last balance I saw, we had been able to remove among ourselves 70% of the obstacles that had been identified at the outset between the 4 countries. Another main objective of the administration is working together and bringing ourselves closer to the Pacific Alliance. This is something that was put forward very early when then Foreign Minister Serra took office last May, and this was also a discussion of which Ambassador Amaral was very much part of when he was acting informally as counsel as advisor to Minister Serra before coming to Washington. And I just came from stops in Lima, Bogota, and Santiago, where I handed, as a special envoy, invitations by President Temer to the leaders of those countries for them to consider. We're seeing if that will be possible to come to Brasilia on the occasion of the Mercosul Summit on December 21st for a joint meeting of the Pacific Alliance and Mercosul leaders. Mexico received their invitation directly in Brasilia. Foreign Minister Videgaray visited last Friday and received their president's invitation directly from President Temer. The foreign ministers met last April there was a hoja de ruta that was designed among the four of them. And a lot of the work that was decided at that time has been performed, the preparatory work. We're trying to move forward in that direction. We're also hearing opinions from others, including from the IDB. We had a meeting yesterday with the president of the IDB in which this was discussed. We remain active in Central America and in the Caribbean, although our ability to, for instance, in the area of cooperation was affected by budget constraints which resulted from the recession in the last 2 years and also from fiscal discipline measures. But we are already recovering. We have already, both last year and this year, we have recovered some of our budget capabilities, some of our, and we have already reinforced resource-wise the Brazilian Agency of Cooperation. So we are restoring our capacity to accelerate cooperation programs with partners in Central America, the Caribbean, and also in Africa. This is geographical, so I come to the U.S. We are working at the very outset of the current Brazilian administration. We sat down with our U.S. partners in the State Department and set out and designed a more compact agenda of objectives that both sides consider relevant and that they estimate at least some of them doable in short and medium run, in medium term. So we're working on that. That has been the basis of our conversation for this last year and a half. This was also something that we discussed on this occasion. There are many things going on the side. It's not that we are only doing these 10 points, but we decided to be practical and try to to make progress on some more concrete items of our relationship, and with that, try to create momentum to push forward a broader agenda. And as I said at the opening, there's a constant dialogue between the U.S. and Brazil here in Brasilia and also in multilateral fora. So there's a regular dialogue and no noise to speak of in our relationship, as you also, those of you who know our relations know. Trade-wise, as you know, we have an almost free market situation. We have in 2018 and 19, we will have a free trade among all South American countries except Guyana and Suriname. And what is missing today for Mercosur and for Brazil is a deeper opening between Brazil and Mexico and Mercosur and Mexico. We're negotiating an expansion of our current trade agreement with Mexico at this very time. And there's political will on both sides to move as far and as fast as we can in that direction. That's the piece that is missing in this this edifice of free trade among the major economies in the region. And we're working towards that. And we're expanding arrangements that we have with other countries, such as we did last year with Peru, where we included areas such as government procurement that were not present before in our trade arrangement. Africa, we have, unlike what was said at the beginning of this administration when some said that we would turn our backs on Africa, very much on the contrary. In the space of 3 to 4 months, if I'm not mistaken, Foreign Minister Aloysio Nunes has visited 11 countries in Africa. We are restoring, as I said, working to restore and intensify our cooperation programs in Africa, with African countries. There's a strong demand in African countries for cooperation, for example, in the field of agriculture. There's great interest in many of our African partners for our experiencing in becoming what we became as far as agriculture is concerned. We do that bilaterally, and we also do that triangularly, as we do with Japan in Mozambique, where JICA and Embrapa, our ag research enterprise, are trying to reproduce the experience that we had in the Cerrado around Brasilia that transformed Brazil into the ag powerhouse that it is today. We have a lot in common with Africa. As you know, we are also an African country, strong African presence there. And with economic recovery and with budget recovery that has already happened and will continue to happen, I hope. I hope the planning ministry doesn't make me wrong. We will be able to reinforce our cooperation programs. Well, with Europe, quickly I have to accelerate this. With Europe, as you know, we are at a mature stage of negotiations for a trade agreement with Europe at this very point in time. By the way, Mercosur negotiators today are in Brussels negotiating on that. We are at, let's say, a late stage of the negotiations. We also have negotiations with EFTA going on, and there has been indication both from on our part and on that of the British that once their process of Brexiting is completed, and nobody knows when that will be, there is also disposition on both sides to talk about freeing trade among ourselves as well. In areas where we haven't had a traditional presence, such as the Caucasus area, our foreign minister just visited Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan, first ever Brazilian foreign minister ever to do so. We have strong links with Armenia. There's a strong Armenian descendant community in Brazil, as many of you know. We have between Asia and Europe, we have there's a strong relationship with Russia as well that our foreign minister and our president have also visited. With the Middle East, you know that we have very strong links, immigration links. Our current president is of Lebanese origin, first generation. There's a strong, it is estimated between 7 and 12 million Brazilians of mostly of Lebanese and Syrian origin. President Temer will probably make a visit to the Gulf region in February. President and Minister José Serra visited Israel last year for the funerals of Shimon Peres. There's also a strong Jewish community in Brazil, as you all know. Our links with Asia are becoming stronger and stronger. We have traditional relations with Japan that began in 1895, but became stronger with Japanese immigration to Brazil that began in 1908. Brazil holds the largest community of Japanese descendants in the world, between 1.5 and 2 million Japanese descendants in Brazil. Strong economic and trade relations. China, well, is today our #1 trading partner, moving very quickly up the ladder in terms of ranking as a foreign investor in Brazil, very quickly. You know that as well. With Korea also we have stronger relations, and there are relevant Korean and Chinese immigration communities in Brazil as well. With Korea and with Japan, there have been manifestation of interest both ways regarding possible trade talks. So that is also an area that's advancing. The same with India. With India, we have very strong relations. They're growing up, they're rising up the ladder in terms of their relevance as a trading partner for Brazil. And And we are now currently negotiating an expansion of our very modest trade agreement with them to increase its breadth and coverage of that. With ASEAN, we're also moving ahead in strengthening relations. Minister Nunes visited ASEAN countries a few months ago, and the president will visit in January Indonesia, first time ever for a Brazilian president, Singapore and Vietnam. And they are also, you just have to see our trade balance, increasingly relevant trading partners for Brazil. BRICS and IPSA are also arrangements where we deal with the countries that are member of those. The BRICS agenda has been broadening over the years. IPSA went through a lull for some time, but we are now restarting and relaunching IPSA. Just to wrap up, just to remind people of the obvious. Brazil, yes, is a South American country. Brazil, yes, is a Latin American country. Brazil, yes, is also an African country, also a European country, all the Portuguese, Italians, all the immigration that we have. As I mentioned, a Lebanese, Syrian country as well, Japanese, Korean. So we have, as the US does, and this is something that is well known here, we have a complex identity because of the way our nation was formed, which, just as the US, is basically through the meeting between indigenous populations that were originally there and immigration from all over the world, just as occurs here. And we have a complex identity, not only ethnically and culturally and religiously, but also we have a complex identity that derives from the growing complexity of our society and of our economy. So Brazil is a complex entity, and I think we should be regarded as such and dealt with as such. We are not a country whose identity or role is circumscribed to one region of the world. So I would say, you know, I don't think I'm overdoing this. We are a country that is the result of an inflow. Today has ties to all economies around the world. We are increasingly linked to the world economy. We were built by the demographic contribution from peoples from all over the world. So we are a very large country. We are a large economy. We are a complex economy. We are a complex society. We are a complex democracy. We have a complex political system that is improving democratically, and I think this identity, which is an evolving identity, and evolving, I think, in the right direction, in all spheres, in the political sphere and in the economic sphere, and also in the sphere of democracy, social justice, civil rights. I think this has to be taken into consideration by our partners when they deal with us. I don't think there is any simplification of what we are, of our nature. This is not bragging, it's just objective reality. So this complexity, so just to consider that, you know, Brazil is, you know, South America. We are South American, very proudly so, but we are, as also our neighboring countries in South America are, much more than that, and that has to be taken into consideration, we believe. And you know, and we have these unexpected aspects of our identity, such as, I'll say that and conclude, such as our link to Japan. I used to go to in the summer in Japan, in Tokyo. There is in August, very hot. There's an Asakusa carnival where 18 escolas de samba, integrated by Japanese, not by Brazilians, do perfect samba on the streets. And when I saw that for the first time, I thought, you know, if a spaceship landed here with perhaps a German on board, and he landed in Tokyo and saw that, he would be totally, you know, he wouldn't understand what's going on. So, and this is Brazil. You know, we are a Japanese country as well. The Japanese know that. Japan is the largest market for Brazilian music after Brazil, larger than the United States. So, and now also this is coming on with China. The multiplication of Chinese investment in infrastructure in Brazil is very eloquent. And our links to China are increasing very fast, just as our links to Korea are increasing very fast. So the world is moving, Brazil is moving in the world that's moving. And so this is a dynamic reality. Some time ago, I was in doubt if I should refer or not to this article, but I just decided I will. An article was written, I don't remember where, that said that Brazilian diplomacy and foreign policy were in hibernation. Well, not only are we not the natural habitat of hibernation, because although we had some, let's say, economic winter in the last 2 years, but we are not hibernating, as you saw when I went through it. And I could do a lot more, but we have time constraints, and I'd bore you. But we have been doing a lot, despite the economic recession, despite the moment of political change that we went through. There is a lot of diplomatic activity, international activity going on, and there is a lot of international interest for Brazil on a permanent basis, as the numbers for FDI into Brazil show. They are very large. They were very large. They remained very large in the range of $60 billion, even when we were at the bottom of our recession. And they're going to pick up strong again this year. So people are looking at Brazil, fortunately, and we are looking at the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcos. We are now going to open for your questions. We have Dora and Priscilla that will bring you the mics. Please speak to the mic because this is being recorded. And Gabriel, you have the first question right there. Gabriel Trebat over there.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your remarks and for your time here with us. You mentioned the EU-Mercosur negotiations are actively underway and in the late stages. At the same time, I know that Brazil is rethinking a number of its industrial policy programs in light of the WTO decision that came out in August. I was wondering if you could share a little bit your thoughts on how Itamaraty is working to, let's say, align the content of the trade negotiations with the formulation of new industrial policies in Brazil. And one I can mention, which I know is expiring soon, is the policy for the automobile sector, and how you're working to make sure that the trade negotiation side and industrial policy is somewhat aligned.
Look, I appreciate your question, but I think you also understand that this is a question that I won't be able to answer directly. Negotiations in Brussels are ongoing. I spoke to our chief negotiator this morning before coming here to update myself on that. The adjustment of industrial policy that follows, there's an appeal process still going on in Geneva, as you know. So this also, because of that, this wouldn't be a subject that I would be prepared to address at this point in time. And also the adjustment that the new policy that is being designed, that redesign is led by the Ministry of Trade and Industry, as you know. So this is not, let's say, we are part of the process. We are consulted in the process, but this is not a process that we lead in this dialogue with industry. And so I'd rather, let's say, I'm not in a position to respond to neither of the elements of your question. The first one, because it's a very much ongoing negotiation at a very important and stage, and when things get talked about and decided, and also on the other front, because it's not something that is let's say, the priority, a purview of my office in Brazil.
Hi, my name is Tony Quintanilla. I work for Perspectiva. I had a question about trade. You mentioned that usually administrations don't do U-turns when a new administration comes in, but one area in which that has changed with this administration is seeking to trade with developed countries. And an example of that, of course, is the OECD request to join the OECD. I just want to get your thoughts about where you see that going and whether there's political capital or will to see that go through.
Look, when I was referring to no U-turns, I was talking about foreign policy.
Okay.
Economic policy and trade policy do undergo, let's say, more, let's say, stronger adjustments than foreign policy, stricto sensu, what I was talking about. Regarding our request for accession to the OECD, we think it's a major movement. And one could also say it's a major statement on the part of Brazil in terms of we have already, well, as most of you know, we have been working within and with the OECD now for over 2 decades. We are the non-OECD member with the deepest, with the greatest, largest commitment and accumulated, how do you say, compromissos. Commitments, engagement to the OECD, as you know. So, but anyway, it's not minor that an economy of the size of Brazil announces its decision to request accession to the OECD. It has obvious systemic implications, I would say. For Brazil, it shows commitment to a path on which we are on, and also, and we expect that, and I know and I hope that OECD members appreciate that, and that this could lead to their support, and because I'm sure they understand the relevance of this, not only for Brazil but for the OECD, and I would even dare say for the international economy as a whole. It's not minor, and we hope that OECD members that have, for a long time, been pointing in the direction that towards our getting closer to the OECD, following a path closer to the OECD. So it would be a matter of coherence that now that we are applying for accession, that we receive the friendly support of OECD members who are all friends and partners of Brazil.
Thank you. David Nelson with GE. Thank you, Ambassador, for your presentation and tour d'horizon. I think everybody welcomes Brazil's sort of reemergence of a vigorous foreign policy and a change in trade policy. Very welcome. As you know, the Latin American foreign ministries in particular have long had a view that non-interference in the internal affairs of foreign countries is kind of a pillar of foreign policy. At the same time, you described human rights as one of the key issues that Brazilian foreign ministry is looking at. You have a failed state on your north, a humanitarian crisis, arguably. What do you think the international community can do to solve that crisis? And should Brazil, given its weight in the region, play a leading role in that?
Well, I was expecting that question, and I welcome it. As you know, this was one of the most visible adjustments in Brazilian foreign policy when the new government came in May last year. We have been playing a strong role, I believe, in terms of the international engagement towards support, let's say, in order that asking for restoration of democracy in Venezuela. We played a leading role in the suspension of Venezuela from the Mercosur. The humanitarian crisis is on our border. There are between 20 to 30,000 Venezuelan refugees that have come into the state of Roraima on the border of Venezuela, and some have spread down to Brazil. The issue, this is not as great number-wise as it is with Colombia, because it's a more densely populated border. But it creates, this is something that is being coordinated by the President's office, because this is already taking a toll as far as health systems in Roraima go, because it's a state with a very small population. It would be the US equivalent, let's say, of Montana. So to have a state with a small population where there could be even more than now an inflow of people that would pressure further public systems in the region is not minor. But of course we have a concern with the Venezuelan, the state, the life of Venezuelans, the state of Venezuelan economy. We doubled the size of, we doubled the staff of our embassy in Caracas in order that we may be more extensively informed, and that our diplomatic presence be quantitatively and qualitatively more relevant. And we have done that already in this administration. And we have been reiterating our positions all the time. And also speaking to partners, mostly within the region, within Mercosur, within the Lima Group, at the OAS, where this issue is also being discussed and takes, where our ambassador here is also deeply engaged. So it's a situation of major concern for Brazil, for Brazilian society, and that was the reason why there was an adjustment in our position in that regard, because that's something that Brazilian society and public opinion were asking for. And the economic failure, we are concerned with the social situation there too. Early last year, we made an offer to send, one of the problems there is the lack of medicine. We offered to send medications produced by Brazilian public laboratories, but it was not accepted because we wanted to do it through, not directly through the government, but through some other organizations such as Caritas from the Catholic Church, but this was not accepted. But we continue to be willing we're fully engaged in that issue, and that's a priority issue for all countries in the region, and much more so for Brazil. We share a 2,000-kilometer border with Venezuela. And we, as you know, have a strong business presence there, credits, etc.
Hi, Ambassador. My name is Paola from the National Television in Brazil. My question is actually similar to the one just asked. I would like to know if after your meeting with Ambassador Thomas Shannon on Monday, there were new steps agreed on as regards the situation in Venezuela.
No. We didn't get, there were no new steps agreed regarding Venezuela. Venezuela, of course, came up in the conversation, but there was nothing new. This is an ongoing process. We are in contact with our partners in the region and outside of the region regarding the situation in Venezuela 7 days a week. So it's a matter of permanent concern, and so there was no direct outcome of my meeting with Ambassador Shannon regarding Venezuela.
Ambassador João Velasco from Albright Stonebridge. I'm over here in the couch.
Where are you? Can't see you, Joel. There you are.
Question on China. You've served in Japan. You've served here. You described this sort of rapid growth of China in terms of bilateral trade. How do you see that relationship evolving between Brazil and China? And then as you think of the next few years, what are the areas that Brazil needs to focus, both in terms of defense and in handling some of the threats, but also seizing some of the opportunities? So give you a chance to talk a little bit more about China as you see it today.
Look, regarding China, trade-wise, this is something that has come gradually. And China is number 1 or number 2 or number 3 trading partner for most countries around the world. So this is not a Brazilian singularity there. But it is our number 1 export market. it's what has been changing more rapidly and more recently is the investment side, Chinese investments flowing into Brazil. Partnerships, business partnerships between companies had been developing for some time, over time. So this is not something that is let's say sudden. And as you know, I would say, and I don't risk. I think I'm not wrong about this. China is another country that is not into sudden U-turns. They also work with a sense of strategic parameters, and in this we share. Brazilian diplomacy shares with Chinese diplomacy a commonality is that we tend to work long term with long term guidelines and objectives. So it's a relationship that, as it grows and as the agenda broadens, it will gain. It will be let's say a broader. Try to look at you. It'll be a broader. Our agenda is expanding. Our agenda is diversifying, and what we have to do between the two governments is to match, let's say, the arrangements we have to manage that agenda. We'll have to update, let's say, the architecture of our dialogue in terms of how the bureaucracies speak to each other, how our governments speak to each other, and how we both sides also let's say stimulate their private sectors to talk to each other. As it grows, we're going to have to, let's say, increase our capacity to make our dialogue more efficient, and ultimately that architecture of dialogue will have to live up to and reflect the growing complexity and diversity of that relation, which is a relationship that is strategic for both countries involved.
Claudia.
Hi.
Hi, good to see you.
How are you? Good to see you too. Going back to Venezuela, there are pressure from the opposition that they say that other countries in the region, especially the group of Lima countries, should adopt specific sanctions targeting individuals that are in the government of Venezuela today, the same way that the United States has adopted. What is the position of Brazil? It seems that Argentina is considering this move. Would Brazil impose this kind of sanctions? And another topic in Venezuela, today there was the announcement, the vice president in Venezuela said that Maduro will seek re-election next year. What is the impact of this decision on the Venezuelan crisis?
Look, regarding sanctions, first, I'm not able to respond to the question regarding what the Lima group countries or Brazil are considering in terms of adopting sanctions targeted at individuals, as the U.S. did. Regarding the Brazilian position in vis-a-vis sanctions, there's a fine line there. Traditionally, Brazil has, let's say, not been supportive of unilateral sanctions. But we understand that sanctions such as those that have been adopted by the U.S. and others have an effect, and so there's a fine line there between sanctions that would indiscriminately hurt, let's say, the day-to-day life, further hurt the day-to-day living of the Venezuelan population, and measures that contribute or may contribute to, let's say, may act as an incentive, one could say, towards, and may contribute towards the sort of progress we want towards the restoration of democracy in Venezuela. So it's it's I know I'm not being very clear here, but I think you get me right. It's no, I'm not able to respond to that part of the question. What I was responding to the general question regarding our position regarding sanctions. I'm not able to respond to the second part of the question regarding consideration or not by Lima Group countries or Brazil of measures regarding individuals in Venezuela. But and also we believe that, for instance, on the financial markets, measures that have the contrary effect of providing that go in the opposite direction of those that were made to limit financial, let's say, how do we say, scope. We also think that they should be avoided. I'd rather not comment on that right now. It's too on top of the fact. I'll wait for. I haven't spoken to my boss about that yet, so we don't. As it is said in the region, Itamaraty no improvisa.
I'd like to pass the floor on to our Ambassador Tony Harrington, the chairman of the board here at the Brazil Institute Advisory Board.
Thank you, Paulo, and thank you, Ambassador, for returning to Washington and sharing with us how active the ministry and you have been. I don't think we would have appreciated it but for your presence and comments here today, so congratulations on that. I echo your reference to our mutual friend, Ambassador Tom Shannon, Undersecretary Shannon. I think this is a kind of a special opportunity, having someone like Tom Shannon, who served as ambassador to Brazil and was there previously. There's never been someone, I'm confident, at that level of the U.S. State Department who is as knowledgeable and as good a friend of Brazil as Tom Shannon is. So I think it's a special opportunity that you're taking advantage of, and encourage to strengthen the relationship, notwithstanding any diversions that either country may have. I would say there seems to me to be and have been a special relationship between the U.S. and Brazil. It certainly was while I was there, and at that time it was a priority at the highest levels in both countries, at the presidential level. Obviously, you've described a world and a Brazil where the world around is changing, Brazil is changing. With other countries' new roles, do you see any particular displacement or particular implications for the U.S.-Brazil relationship?
With the change regarding others?
Yes, with the broadened scope,
yeah.
China, India, trade arrangements, specific trade arrangements.
Mm-hmm.
Might there be some displacement of the U.S.-Brazil bilateral relationship, which I know continues strong in terms of trade and investment, deep presence in Brazil?
I would say that it's not a zero-sum game, and regarding, so I think there is space for progress on both fronts. Brazil is, as you know very well, big enough, complex enough, and we hope will be growing sufficiently to be able to move ahead strongly with relations with the U.S., China, and other partners around the world. So I don't think there's necessarily any, let's say, displacement implication in that regard. And for instance, in trade-wise, one could remind ourselves, for instance, that of the nature of our trade, the content of our trade. While most Brazilian exports to the U.S. are manufactured goods, in the case of China, we have a highly concentrated export list based on very few commodities that are very strong on our bilateral trade. And on other fronts, I was for some time a Brazilian negotiator at the G20, and I had the experience of having in practice and even in negotiation of very relevant subjects right after the financial crisis. And Fernando Pimentel here was working with me then. We had excellent relations with our U.S. partners and cooperation, and mutually supported each other in many instances, and also very good relations and cooperation, and also occasionally mutually supported each other between Brazil and China. So I think that both the U.S. and Brazil are perfectly capable of working intensely with China and Brazil, and vice versa at the same time. I think we can and definitely should do more of that on all fronts. And also, finally, sorry, I wanted to make a reference to Tom Shannon as well. He is a good friend of Brazil. It is a blessing for us that he is in the position he is in. I met him before he was ambassador in Brazil. I met him, we used to, when he was here in Washington in 2001, 2002, when I was here. Yeah, so we used to go out for lunch when we were mid-level officials, and now we've grown a little older. We continue to be friends, and we very much value his friendship and his being where he is.
Luiz Bittencourt, who was the first director of the Brazil project at the Wilson Center.
And Ambassador Marcos Galvão helped a lot when we put together the program some years ago. Thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador, I would like to ask something about your last point, about the identity and complex identity that Brazil has. And I was curious because this was part of our challenge here to make people understand better Brazil. But I was thinking that when you deal with foreign policy, my impression is that this doesn't matter. What matters is what the country puts on the table for the negotiation, the presence of the country. And one thing that in going around here and talking about Brazil and sometimes trying to explain the complexities that you mentioned was about the last scandals of corruption. And the image of Brazil was certainly affected by that. Would you say that this also affected the ability of the country to push forward the foreign relations objective, the foreign policy objectives? How this may have effect or not the way, the posture of Brazil in international fora?
Look, definitely the news of corruption in Brazil and of the Lava Jato process in Brazil has drawn a lot of attention domestically and internationally. So it has, of course, it's become part of in a central part of news regarding Brazil. Then, of course, you have to see how you read it. On the one hand, because it's not news about corruption, it's news about corruption being fought successfully, and about a large number of people already paying for that, being sanctioned for that. And so it's an anti-corruption operation of a scale that has never been seen before in Brazil, and I would dare say not in many places around the world. And it is not that there is no corruption in other places around the world. So if yes, it points to a problem that exists and that Brazilian society does not deny, and that Brazilian society's tolerance for has gone down to 0 or below that. But also it points to a democracy that has strong institutions and has the ability to deal with them in spite of the scale. Internationally, then, yes, of course, there's an element to that, and that has an effect. In terms of repercussion, it affects mostly our relations with countries where the Lava Jato process has reverberated. But in broader terms, I would say no. I would say that what is coming out is a democracy that had been able to deal with various aspects. Democratization had taken place and had faced some issues. It finally hit the issue of this relationship between the political sector and money. This is something that the Brazilian judiciary, the Brazilian prosecutors, the Brazilian police, federal police, have been able to successfully deal with. It has an impact, yes it does. It draws attention, yes it does. It consumes energy, yes it does. But it points to our moving on and having a system that will have cleansed itself through democratically through democratic institutions. And when I was referring to the complexity of Brazil, and you said we all know that, yes, we all know that. What I wanted to say is that perhaps mostly in the hemisphere, we tend to look at ourselves and to place ourselves hemispherically. And what I was trying to remind myself and others, and this I made in the spirit of contribution, is that when people look at Brazil, yes, they should look at Brazil as part of the hemisphere. Yes, they should look at Brazil as part of South America. But yes, I think Brazil is too big to be looked at as only that. And Brazil has to, and increasingly will have to be looked at as a country that has a global presence and a global role to play.
Yes, please.
Bob Hoff, retired Foreign Service officer. Since President Temer has begun his mandate, have there been any changes with regard to Brazil's foreign policy toward Cuba?
No, there has not been any. There has been no change regarding our foreign policy towards Cuba. Cuba has for some time now not had an ambassador in Brasilia, though it was not a formal withdrawal, but their ambassador has been absent for Brasilia, though they now have an ambassador, a chargé d'affaires, who has the rank of ambassador. And Brazil has a chargé d'affaires in Havana that also has the rank of ambassador, but who is not an ambassador. And as far and business is being conducted in that form, and that's it. Things are going on.
Well, I would like to ask a question regarding cooperation in defense. I don't remember a time, and I have been here for some years, where spokesmen on both sides were so willing to talk in a positive way about potential defense cooperation between Brazil and the United States. It was normally a taboo. At times it was a taboo subject. Now it's no longer. I would like to hear your opinion of this dialogue. Minister Raul Jungmann was just here in Washington, came to talk to us, also here at the Wilson Center and other places, from a diplomat's experience on lenses. How should we look into this moment in Brazil and the United States exploring new areas of cooperation in defense?
Look, I think Joel had mentioned defense. I wasn't trying to avoid it. I had forgotten the second part of your question, Joel, but I'm glad that you asked, Paulo. What has been happening in Brazil is that there is now a working together between defense and the foreign ministry that hasn't occurred before. That's unprecedented. We always, of course, we have a very traditional and stable military. We have a very traditional and stable diplomatic apparatus, as I mentioned. But today we have a degree of coordination and of mutual consultation that we never had before. And this is not only what I am saying, this is something that is also said by our defense leaders, by our military chiefs. In Itamaraty, after many years, finally a department for security and defense affairs was established only in this administration, when we restructured the ministry last year, and this was missing. On the cooperation in defense and security issues is on our short list of priority areas and is considered, as I confirm what you just say, it is regarded by Brazil and the US one of the areas where we're making more progress and where cooperation is more successful. The experience of cooperation during the World Cup and even more so during the Olympics contributed to that. It created momentum, but that momentum has not gone away. And I think that it is only natural that, and certainly Brazil wishes that, and we have indications that that is also true for the U.S. We wish to cooperate in the areas of defense and security. This is something that is relevant for both parties, also in the defense and related industry. There are dialogues going on, and this is also relevant for us. So this is very much not a taboo, and this is very much an area where we wish to work together with the U.S.
Well, thank you very much, Marcos. I would like to make a few announcements for you as we approach the end of the year, the beginning of the new year. We are going to continue to have a very intense program here. Next year is a very complex year for Brazil politically, and we will start the program on January 17th with a presentation, with a morning of discussion on the political year in Brazil. The keynote speaker will be the Speaker of the House of Representatives, the Câmara dos Deputados, Rodrigo Maia. That will be followed by an expanded panel of scholars. Two of them are global scholars now from the Brazil Institute. Fernando Limonge from the University of São Paulo, one of the foremost experts on political systems in Brazil, and Oscar Vilhena, director, dean of the school, the law school at Fundação Getúlio Vargas, São Paulo. Joining them will be our own Matthew Taylor, American University former scholar here. In 10 days or so, more precisely on December 11th, we are going to have an important presentation by the president of the National Electoral Court in Brazil, which is the institution that coordinates, organizes elections in Brazil. Minister Gilmar Mendes of the Supreme Court. It will be his second appearance here in that capacity, and the question is, facing a crucial election in 2018. How is Brazil organizing itself for that? And we are going to put in the discussion the evidence of efforts to manipulating elections that we have seen around the world with new technologies, with social media, etc. How much is Brazil? How is Brazil preparing for that? Because as you know, Brazil is the second user of social media in the world. We'll have, and then this is very important to us at the Brazil Institute. On this December 6th, a week from today, around at this time, because we're going to be at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we are going to talk about culture. We'll have a group of musicians from Brazil, more specifically from the city of Porto Feliz. There are 3 sisters. They have an ensemble called Choro das Três. It's about choro, which is a form of Brazilian jazz. It's only instrumental, and it's a lecture. It's a musical lecture where they play and they explain to people what is the connection. Brazil and the United States have had a musical dialogue since Louis Mohogot-Chock landed in Rio de Janeiro in the 1860s, where he died, after composing one of the most beautiful pieces, which is a variation on the Brazilian national anthem. So we are very glad to host Choro das Três here. This is a group. It's composed by 3 sisters and a father. I think Brazil talked to the United States, and the United States talked to Brazil all the time through music. We know this, but we wanted to highlight what is permanent in this relationship, and I think the cultural element is essential. With that, I would like to thank very much the presence of Ambassador Sérgio Amaral, among us, Ambassador to the United States, our Ambassador José Luis Machado e Costa, head of the permanent mission of Brazil at the Organization of American States, obviously our dear Ambassador Tony Harrington, head of the Brazil Advisory Council, and last but not least, my dear friend, our Deputy Foreign Minister of Brazil. Yes, it's a long road, but it's wonderful to have a person, a diplomat, of the quality of Marcos, who represents very well his colleagues at Itamaraty. Thank you very much. Be here on the 6th.